Way of kings. Way of kings. Way of kings. Way of kings. Dun 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 dun. Way of kings. Way of kings. Way of kings. Way of kings. Dun 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 dun. Way of kings. 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 Chapter 13. 10 Heartbeats.
I accidentally cut this out of the previous video.
And we don't have one of those quotes at the beginning of the chapter from someone who's X number of seconds before death. Instead, we simply have this message. I hope this missive finds you well. Though, as you are now essentially immortal, I would guess that wellness on your part is something of a given.
And now here's this chapter's one.
I realise that you are probably still angry. That is pleasant to know. Much as your perpetual health, I have come to rely upon your dissatisfaction with me. It is one of the Cosmere's great constants, I should think. The Cosmere? The Cosmere, ladies and gentlemen, is the chain that links all of Brandon Sanderson's books. I have only read this Brandon Sanderson book, but I'm constantly informed of it by his fans. Basically, all of his books, no matter what world or universe they may be set in, are technically set in a single world. That is called the Cosmere, and there is one character who is able to travel between them or something, or knows about its existence or something. There's one guy who can exist in any Brandon Sanderson book, and we shall be learning more of him anon. Most of this chapter is everybody from the previous chapter fighting the Chasm Fiend in order to, get the gem hearts out or further the war effort, or whatever it is that you do when you're fighting a gem fiend, a Chasm Fiend, a gem heart, chasm, gem fiend, and it's all generally a cool action sequence, and I pretty much wrote this scene off the first time when I was writing my notes about it. My notes say, and I quote, "There's a moment where the king goes flying off his horse because the saddle girth snaps or something." And I only wrote that down because it was a cool little action sequence, and by the way, during all this, there's a really, really big monster bearing down on them. Well, I didn't think about it at the time, but I've since heard Brandon say that these are instead of dragons in his story. He didn't say that specifically, that it was instead of dragons. I may be putting words into his mouth there, but these are the main big scary creature of this book, and dragons aren't. He just thought it'd be more interesting to have crustaceans instead of lizards, or what have you. So anyway, big monster, brah, they're all fighting it, diff. And one of the actiony things that happens is that something to do with a saddle girth, I don't know what that is, but I think it's a sort of strap, and it means that the saddle, something goes wrong and the king falls off his horse. And I thought that was just a cool action sequence, but it's actually like a vital major plot point, and we have to bear it in mind because we're going to be hearing about it for the entire rest of the book. Here we get to see Dalinar as the Blackthorn fighting and being a hero, but also we see Sadeas get a little bit done as well. He fires the arrow that saves the king. Alright, now just from the title of this chapter I was excited to read it because of course it references the 10 heartbeats to summon a shard blade thing. This is a rule that Brandon established early on in the prologues, I think, with Seth. And it's brilliant, and it's absolutely clever, and now we can talk about why. The 10 heartbeats idea is masterful, because at the same time, it serves as just a brilliant fantasy idea, the idea that you can summon a magic sword like a giant, beautiful ornate magic sword out of thin air if you just wait for 10 heartbeats, because you're bonded to it, it's yours, it's almost part of you, even though when someone dies and loses theirs, you can then pick it up and then it's yours, but nevertheless, the owner is bonded to it and can just summon it out of thin air, but it's a limitation, isn't it? You have to know 10 heartbeats in a... Feel your heartbeat now. See how long 10 heartbeats is. It's probably not all that long, but if someone's rushing... If a giant knight in magic armor was rushing towards you with a big magic sword going, ah, and you needed to go ching with your sword and block his sword, 10 heartbeats might not be enough time. It's agony. You could die 10 times in that time. And sure enough, it's at the beginning of this chapter that Brandon really starts to discuss all of that. By the way, the other side to that is that at least if you are being ambushed, your heart is going to be racing. Any other time, your heart is going to be slower, so if you were doing something where you weren't too bothered, then it would take a long time for your sword to arrive, which sounds fine, because you're not too bothered. It's not that, you don't need it right there and then, but, it could... there are circumstances where you might need it and your heartbeat hadn't sped up. Yeah, Anyway, the point is, it's an interesting bit of rule making that Brandon's done, that's the rule. You have to wait for 10 heartbeats, and that's always going to be subject to change. A heartbeat doesn't always go at the same speed, so depending on the environment, depending on the situation, it can be different. So in this chapter, we basically get a really good sense of what it will be like in this world to watch non-magic users, but still like magic adjacent users, people who have magic armor and magic swords but are not themselves casting spells or anything. We get to see what their combat looks like in this world. And I do mean looks like, and I do mean see. There's something very visual about this whole chapter. I was seeing everything as I was reading it. Brandon attempts to write in a way that makes himself as the writer kind of invisible and for just the story to go in, and that it absolutely does happen. This suggests to me that we might in the future be seeing fights between shardbearers and lashers. Now, Seth was both of those things, so if you fight against him, he gets to basically, you know, take his pick or use both, but we might see a fight between someone with shard plate and shard blade, and then someone who's only got lashing. We already know that shard blades cannot cut flesh, but here we find out about some of the things that they can cut, such as hair, fingernails, chitinous carapaces, stuff that grows out of skin, but not skin itself. But then, once the person is dead, then a shard blade can cut through their skin. Nice little detail about the shard plate helmets in this chapter. If you ka-chung your visor closed, it will just sort of, its edges will just mist away until it's a single piece. But to you, the wearer of the helmet, it's completely transparent. Not complete, it's like dirty glass, so you still need an eye slit to see really properly, but you get this kind of field of vision. You can see movement, you can see things coming. It's quite cool. We get a couple of extra details now, names of things. Elhokar's shard blade is called Sun Razor. Adeline's horse is called Sure Blood. Elhokar, the king, his horse is called Vengeance. Oh, as in the Vengeance Pact, very apt. But it is not a Rhyshadium, it's just a really good horse, of the best Shin stock. Shin. Remember the Shin? Seth, the assassin, and so on? I guess they're good horse guys. But that's clever, see? That's telling us not about the king's horse, that's telling us about the Rhyshadium. That's telling us about Maximus. It means that the horse chooses the rider. Because if it was the other way round, then obviously the king would have the best kind of horse that there is, and the Rhyshadiums are obviously the best kind of horse that there is. But he hasn't got one. But Dalinar has, and his son has. And finally, Dalinar's shard blade is called Oathbringer. There you go. That's another chapter of the Way of Kings. See, they're quicker now, aren't they? Yeah. Oh, this is such a relief. Woo! I'm gonna be racing through them a bit faster now. We might.